Yeah, and we have with us on set Margaret Nicholas, who's the Executive Director of NCFC. We have Dr. Susan, how do I pronounce that? Kasedde, who is the country representative for UNICEF. And we have, I think Marlene did me this morning, because these last names are first world. Emily Barcklow? Barcklow, I came very close. Who is from the CAMY fund?
The Central American Mexico Youth Fund.
All right. And you guys are here this morning to talk to us about the incidence of early marriage workshop that was recently held between UNICEF and Belize.
Partners,
Yeah. So talk to us about why this workshop is necessary. Was necessary.
To ask
good morning, and thanks for allowing us the privilege this morning. Really and truly, the workshop is currently being held in Belize. It's a 2-day workshop. It started yesterday, and what we are really doing is to look at the problem and the scope of it. The National Committee for Families and Children, as you know, is mandated to ensure compliance on the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And in its efforts to comply, we have been involved in several initiatives. And one of it is the development of a national child protection strategy to end violence against children. And we really and truly looked at this problem, and it is indeed a harmful practice and also a human rights violation against our young girls in particular. And so a part of the roadmap that we have developed in the strategy plan is to look and address this issue in a very holistic way. And so we were very happy when we approached UNICEF. And UNICEF right away was on board with us. And then we were evenly fortunate to have CAMY funds join us in addressing this process. So we gathered a number of stakeholders and civil society organizations so that we could actually understand, because I think that for too long, you know, our norms and values sometimes are screwed. And I think sometimes we believe that these things are commonplace and that they're okay. And we have, as a matter of fact, been discussing this in our child protection technical working group, because there is such a group. And so the discussion has been going on for some time within our groups and without our groups and with UNICEF and other stakeholders. But we thought that it was necessary to bring a number of other persons, like the churches, the Mothers Union, NGOs, and particularly the judiciary, and particularly young people, so that we can hear their voices, because it is important, since it affects them, because we're talking about marriages, Kevin, of people who are under 15, under 16. Because while you know that we could get married at 16 with consent of parents, we have a lot of young persons who have been married before they're 16. And so we know that also the health risk, they're not physically, psychologically, you know, when you look at the whole development process, you know, are they really ready to be married? And I think one of the other things that really hits is the fact that some of these husbands are very old in comparison to some of these young girls. And when we start to think that culture overrides human rights and it overrides legislation and all that, we really have something to think about. And so the whole idea then was to get everybody involved, have people understand, and at the end of the day, we want to develop a roadmap, which is going to then set out actions and plans that will eventually alleviate this, this problem and this harmful practice towards our young persons.
Can I just jump in here? Because there's something that I have to say. You know, when I saw and got the information of a workshop on early or childhood marriages, it raised an alarm, because one can safely assume that a workshop would not be held if we did not have a problem. And I think many times things happen in our society and we aren't aware of. Early childhood marriage. I think many have the misconception that it takes place in rural areas, that maybe we've done work and the laws have fixed it and it hasn't been taking place. Now, please, for those of us who were naive enough to believe that, what is the extent of the problem in this country? And when you say marriage, what validates a marriage?
Malini, perfect question. And in Belize, we know that 1 out of every 5 15 to 19-year-olds is currently married or in union. So that's 1 out of every 5 of 15 to 19-year-olds. In the Stand Creek district, it's 1 out of every 3 15 to 19-year-olds. And this is data from the mix. So as UNICEF, we know, because we're part of a global partnership addressing this issue, we know that 1 out of every 5 girls is married before the age of 18. A child defined in the Convention of the Rights of the Child is a person in need of special protection. If a child is entering into a marriage relationship, a union, with the obligations and responsibilities that entails, and the impact physically, emotionally, psychologically, and otherwise that entails, we know that it is virtually impossible for that child to meet those obligations, and that is an incidence that reflects neglect of duty and failures in protection. So in Belize, we have a real challenge. Our data looks at the different modalities of early union in Belize, but it's absolutely not the case that we don't have cause for concern here. So the partnership and the discussion that is going on over this couple of days is critical. This generation of leaders, of actors everywhere in Belize has a fundamental duty to make sure that we ask the right questions about where and why this practice is continuing, and what we can do as institutions, as partners, to end it, not just to reduce it, to end it, because it is a neglect of protection and duty of care.
Well, but I know you have a question. Just one thing is nagging me, and I want to ask the question again. What validates these marriages? If a child is not allowed to get married under the age of 16, how do we have statistics that say a 15-year-old is being married?
And that is precisely the problem. That one of the things that we are trying to find out are the drivers. What is driving these situations? Who are conducting these marriages?
So someone has to sign a document to say you're married.
So who is conducting these marriages? And the workshop, to some extent, is starting to expose that.
Sure. Can we go back a little, because there are probably some people out there who don't have the legal foundation to understand the context of this discussion.
Yes.
So can we first step back a little and talk about because a marriage is a legal construct.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're not.
It has to be legitimized somewhere.
Right.
Yeah. And so there is a law which says how somebody gets married and who can be married.
Right.
And that law tells us that a person in Belize can be, it's Marriage Act, and a person can be married in Belize at what age?
At 18.
At 18.
However, there is a proviso.
There's a proviso. And
Which
that proviso
says that they could marry at 16 since 2005, but with parental consent.
Parental consent.
Okay.
And the question is the legitimacy of that consent from the perspective of the child.
But key to that, before people are saying, well, why would we put in 16? That was actually an elevation of the prior age that used to be 14.
Right.
Correct.
So it was, do we call it minimal progress in being able to move from 14 to 16 at the very least?
Let's call it progress, but it is not sufficient. This is not where we want to be. We want to make sure that the best interests of children are taken into full consideration and regarded in every case. And we do have to ask the questions about where there are failures in systems for protection, leading, for example, to marriage or entry into contract of a child in a marriage that is counter to the law. But we also have to talk about failures in systems of protection in terms of parents and the license that is given to parents to consent to a marriage on behalf of a child when the risk of failure to protect that child through that particular provision.
Are there specific reasons that have to be cited as to why a parent would consent to their 16-year-old being married? I mean,
I just wanted to add
Yeah,
something
jump in.
to that conversation.
Yeah.
That actually legal formal marriages are not the norm. The norm are informal unions.
Come on.
Come on.
Both in Belize and throughout the Latin American Caribbean region.
So it's more than
So
what the numbers we're
it's-
quoting right now.
Yes, though I understand that
The
the
mixed
mix
state, yeah,
includes
includes
both
Common law.
legal
Includes common
marriages
law.
and common law.
Can,
And
Well,
also
I don't know
visiting
if we call it common
relationships.
law, we call it early unions.
Yes.
Early
but,
unions.
but can,
or illegal unions.
and this really is a legal conversation for a large part because, and if I could merge that with the social aspect of it, because we're talking past a truth, which is that legally, sex can be had by a minor at 16.
Yes.
Yes.
So we can't be talking about marriage, which is what it is, just a social contract, and not be talking about the issue of sex, which is part of marriage, because you cannot have a marriage unless it's consummated.
Right.
So there has to be sex in a marriage. So how do we get all the way to marriage and we've talked past the issue of sex?
Yeah, I think that there is a tendency to bring those two issues together, and I think there's an importance in separating them. Just because we're looking to end child marriage does not mean that we should raise the age of consent. Young people, adolescents, have a right to exercise their sexual, have sexual relations, and we should not criminalize that by raising the age of consent.
But
That would be a step back, I believe.
yeah.
Is that a perspective shared by all? Because isn't UNICEF or local agencies working towards raising the age of consent, or at least taking an honest look at it?
Well, actually, it has been on the table.
Yeah.
We have been discussing it over and over again.
Yeah.
Because even the Child Protection Technical Working Group, they have had many discussions around the whole issue,
Yeah.
as was raised by Kevin in terms of the age of consent at 16, and then the age of marriage at 18, but parental consent. And sometimes these things are very contradictory, as you are saying, and controversial. And I think that when we look on the Convention on the Rights of the Child, which says that the child is a person under the age of 18, then those are some of the discussions and the considerations as to how we move forward. I believe a lot of times in the discussion is that young people, because of some of the physical and other developmental issues, are inclined to want to have sex early and so on and so forth. But really and truly, we really need to help them to understand the consequences of engaging too early in sex and that kind of thing. So,
If I could, I just want to add that the rights of the child are indivisible and inalienable, and among those, among the provisions in the Convention for the Rights of the Child is a recognition of evolving capacity of the child. And we know that the evolving capacity of the child has to be taken into consideration, because a 7-year-old child is capable of a level of reason, interpretation, and understanding of consequence that is different from a 4-year-old. And similarly, a 12, a 16-year-old is capable of a different degree of reason, understanding. And so that evolving capacity has to be taken into consideration in review of all the various provisions for protection. And that is why what many countries have taken into consideration as they consider the adolescent development and the evolving sexual development of a child, and the issue about making sure we do not criminalize children for a natural adolescent development is key. However, the other thing that we have to be very careful about is creating conditions that enable sexual exploitation of a child who is continually evolving. So it is a delicate,
but that's how it gets murky. And if I could
very murky.
Yeah, well, but it is a delicate issue, and I don't run away from that. I mean, the difference is, if I could just use an example so our viewers can be absolutely clear. Your concern in criminalizing children is if 2 17-year-olds engage in sexual intercourse. And we know it's happening because their age of initiation is 14 and 15, I think. Versus a 16-year-old having sex with a 40-year-old.
Correct.
And that's where you have challenges. But I really, and I know this is a very interesting conversation. We
Yes.
can go down that road, but I don't want to lose the opportunity to talk about the fact that we are facing 1 out of every 5 girls between 15 and 19 being in a union or marriage.
Right.
And I think that is the conversation here. And I think going back to what I was asking in terms of what legitimizes a marriage, are we saying that there are legal entities that don't know the law, that are signing off on marriages with 15-year-olds or younger in this country? Is that what we're saying?
Yes, that is what we're saying.
How is this possible?
Well, it is. And that is what we're saying. And we learned a whole lot more yesterday in terms of what is really happening in our society. And I don't want to speculate what are the reasons and why some people are marrying off young persons. I think some of it has to do with religious beliefs. That once two people are together, then they should be married. And of course, it is also, we have to take into consideration that a lot of these marriages are forced, in a sense, no? Because while, yes, it's a contract between two persons, I have to want to be married, you know? And so what, and I think you asked the question, what are some of the reasons why I would want my daughter to get married at 15 to Kevin? You know why? I mean,
I'm
why?
already married, so
because, sure, Kevin, I know that you're already married. But so why would I want her to be married to a man as old as Kevin? Why? Because she's pregnant and maybe Kevin is going to get into problems because he's, you know, having sex with a underage girl, a minor. And Kevin knows the consequences of that as a lawyer. So the thing is that these are some of the issues that we are looking at. Because there's the whole sugar daddy
I was going to say
syndrome. Then there's the whole matter of CSIC. There's the whole matter of, you know, so it's
So in other words, the person can be a financial, we've heard stories like this where someone is a
And it
financial
could be a
provider and you
financial
get to marry
provider
my
to-
daughter.
It could be a financial provider to me. Yesterday and I could share. Yesterday we had a story that was shared with us where the mother gets $20 a week from a particular sugar daddy. And so it was okay for her to continue in the relationship. The mother was willing to go to school to explain that to the school. You know that. So you know it's a myriad of issues really.
See, I'm really having problems when things are murky, as Marlene described. I have serious problems because for the very same reason, and you were talking about they need to separate the two. But then at the same breath, you were saying that one of the big incidents is common law unions. And so the issue of, one of the main reasons why a parent would probably say, listen, easy to get married, because you've probably been having sex with that person from about 15. And so it's just a progression. No, and then another thing
But
is,
that's an
if you're saying, I'm
that's
talking about it
not
in
a
a very
fact.
practical way.
Yeah.
But the other thing, if you're saying that this is a group that needs protection, marriage is just an institution. Sex is an actual physical act. So how do we separate the two? And finally, the question as to, this is a policy issue. It's the proviso. All that needs to be done is to change the proviso that says you no longer can get married
Until you're 18.
until you're 18.
And so that is one of the recommendations that was mentioned yesterday.
Yeah.
To remove the proviso from the legislation. That was definitely one of the recommendations. I think, however, a lot of people are still concerned, as you are, about the fact that young people are still engaging in sex.
Yeah.
And are in common law, what we would call common law. And even that we question, is it really common law? What kind of rights does a 14, 15-year-old have in a common law relationship after 2 years? When do we start to count whether it is a common law relationship or not in terms of the law and their rights as common law unions? So, you know, like I said, there is so many things because really and truly, if we are saying legally they cannot be married until they're 18, yes, we are saying they could have sex at 16, but does the law really set out if you're in a common law union by 14, 15, by the time you're 21 and that relationship is over,
Do you
Or
have
your
rights?
common law wife.
Do you have rights?
Or your common law husband, you know, so.
I'm glad
so this is
Kevin asked that question, because that's where I felt that we would have to lead this conversation. And, you know, there's the old saying, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? And removing the issues regarding child marriage gives us an opportunity to then tackle issues of statutory rape or rape. But I want to ask, are there other countries that have just been able to say, you know what, the Convention on the Rights of the Child defines a child as 18, let us simply make it the law that a person has to be an adult to be married. In other words, a person has to be 18 to be married, period.
Yes, yeah. In fact, Guatemala in 2015 had put the minimum age of marriage at 18 with exceptions, and they recently closed that loophole, and so there are no exceptions. In El Salvador and Honduras, legislation has changed around that and put it at 18 without any exceptions. So throughout the region, there's a tendency towards this, and that actually is a good segue into what I was also going to mention, which is that there are limitations to what laws can do on this issue. And it's really important to look at this issue from a comprehensive perspective, and like, for instance, changing social norms is also very important, and you know, bringing in different sectors, education and employment is also very important. So we're going to be able to do something with laws, but we're not going to be able to do everything with laws.
Yeah, but it is a first step.
Yes, and I just want to build on what Emily is sharing, because this discussion that we're having is really about an issue of the same challenge that we come back to all the time about transforming our societies and building them into the societies that we wish them to be and that we deserve to live in. So child marriage is one issue affecting children, but reflecting attitudes, norms, and things that we've taken for granted. Now, we know that if we consider the child affected by early marriage, by child marriage or an early union at the center, we've got to educate them, inform them so that they know their rights and can demand them. At the same time, we have to reach parents, we have to reach communities and start to grapple with the myths and misconceptions that they have around entitlements of children, duties of parents and community members for protection and care. And then we also have to address the issue of services. Unless services and opportunities are available around this child, around families, then we leave these families and children still exposed to the same gaps and challenges that are driving them into opting for the solution of marriage for security of the family. And that has to complement what we put in place in terms of laws and policies to enable that entire cycle.
But
so we do
changing
need
the
that.
law is one thing,
Yes.
but there are some low-hanging fruits, because if we know that people are illegally legalizing childhood marriages, then that's an issue for the judiciary. I don't know if it's sensitization, education, or just enforcement. How does a marriage certificate get filed if someone is not of the proper age or without the documentation for consent?
It's an interesting revelation.
Well, you were at the family court, so you know this, you know.
It's an interesting revelation.
The Chief Justice was a part of this, and that's why I was saying it shows the importance of it to the judiciary.
Yes.
So it seems that there's a trickle-down issue that has to take place. What is the because a workshop is wonderful for sensitization, but it can also be an impetus for action. And so you have the Chief Justice there as a listening ear. What's the commitment to ensure that whether it's a JP or whoever it is in a particular village or town, because it's not just a rural issue, that they will adhere to at least what the law says for now?
Well, I mean, the thing is that, like I said, we are, at the end of this day, putting together a roadmap to address all of the legal, social, all of the issues that surrounds this whole issue. And we are, you know, there are several steps that we want to take. And one of the things that we did was to make sure that we had our CEOs on board so that they could understand what is happening. Because I think that at whatever level we are, sometimes we're not very cognizant of everything that is taking place around us. And so, you know, it is to bring that sensitization to that level, to also brief our cabinet on what is happening. And then as we look at our own policy and legal reform committee, to have them committed because they have a responsibility to change and to look at these laws. And we, as the National Committee for Families and Children, will continue our advocacy in having the laws change. We have to continue our advocacy in ensuring that each implementing agency, whether it is education, social service, or whoever, that they provide. Because if that is not going to happen, then we would be wasting our time. Yeah. So it is a matter of ensuring that in our collaboration or deliberations and so on and so forth, that we continue to monitor and evaluate these situations. That we continue to get our quarterly report cards from ministries to see what is it that you're doing to address this particular, because you have made that commitment. Yeah. Because apart from that, we have the children's agenda. And under the children's agenda, there are so many government commitments, and all of these commitments speaks to all of these issues, you know.
Can I, because I'm looking at this thing as it's almost like the vestigial tale of something that has no relevance now. I'm talking about the proviso. As I understand it, in the past, and there are two reasons that I know of, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, as to why the age was at 14. One was a cultural thing because of what was happening in terms of the Mayan community and being sensitive to the Mayan culture. And the second was because there was a law which allowed for, if you were having sexual relations with a young lady between the ages of 14 and 16, then if you were married to them, it was a legal excuse. If you were to have sex with them, if you were married, you were excused by law. The second excuse, which was the fact that it was a defense to having sex with a minor, if you were married to them, has been removed. And the law has now changed to having unlawful carnal
sexual
intercourse. So that defense is out. And the Mayan community has taken evolved and taken a different direction. So I'm kind of baffled as to why this law even exists, particularly
the proviso.
And it's not the proviso. Particularly when it's not an issue of criminalizing. The issue of a marriage is a license. That's not a matter of going to jail, it's a matter of giving somebody a license. So the question of why does it still exist is baffling me.
I think that's great. And the way that I'm hearing this question is important for the conversation. What we heard from the Chief Justice yesterday is how the law has evolved over time. And I'm sure that at every point in time where the law was revised, it was revised to address what seemed to be a paradox, an absolutely inexplicable, series of questions that highlighted the inadequacy of the law as it stood. And that's where we stand right now. And so we have an opportunity now to bring the law in line with the ideals as we see them. And that's what this conversation is about in the workshop, and that's the opportunity that we have moving forward through the roadmap. But I think, and I just wanted to share, yesterday we also had a presentation of data on perspectives from young people across the country and adults. We did a survey using mobile tools, U-Report and WhatsApp to find out what people know about child marriage and what they would do if they saw somebody involved in a child marriage or an early union. And overwhelmingly, people said they would either report to social services, but an equal proportion said they would do nothing. And I think that tells us something. We have got to put in place opportunities, services, information to inform and empower everybody to act, to do the right thing to protect children who may be having their rights violated as a result. The law is one solution, but it won't be ineffective if we don't get everybody fully enlisted and accountable to act to protect.
I think that's such an important point, and that's what I wanted to ask next, because while changing the law, and I think I don't understand why it just cannot be done, but I do know why, but I don't understand. But the fundamental issue here is that there still is families of one family out of 5 that is okay or seemingly okay with their child being in an early union or a legal marriage. And that goes to what we were saying before, core beliefs and perceptions that we have of young girls and their value. And so my question is, how much of the conversation and subsequent actions will be addressing this issue. Because if I am a mother and I feel that it's okay for my 14-year-old, 15-year-old, or even 16 with my consent to be living with an adult male or married to an adult male, it says a lot of my own thoughts and perceptions of myself and subsequently my child. And that's where I think the greatest disconnect would be. So without being judgmental, I have to recognize that if it is happening, there are people that are okay with it. What do we do about that?
Go ahead.
So just to mention that the Central America Mexico Youth Fund has been supporting youth-led projects in Belize since 2014 on this issue and related issues. And one of the projects that we're supporting is in the Toledo district. It's an organization called Toledo Maya Women's Council. And they are actually working with parents, with community leaders, and with girls precisely to change these perceptions, and so that parents are invested and concerned about their girls completing their education, that community leaders are supporting girls' safe spaces and not, for instance, authorizing illegal marriages, and that girls themselves, believe in their value and their worth and have a stronger sense of self-esteem. So I think that again, going back to what Dr. Susan mentioned, is it's just really important to go beyond laws here and look at how do we change social norms, attitudes, perspectives.
I think that the question of gender equality is truly at the heart of this. The question of the value of girls, the question of the expression of masculinity and the permissions that are given to males in our society is also fundamental in this. This is what child marriage is all about. And we're living in particularly interesting times because this question is coming up again and again in the way that we see sexual rights being expressed or permitted of girls, of men. And child marriage is sort of it's one of the places where all of this comes to a head for girls. It starts very early and it restricts girls very early. It affects their health, their education, their opportunities for inclusion and participation. These are the conversations we're having. We have to have a conversation about the consequences of this kind of this particular practice for not only the girl, but for the family long term, for the community, for the household. Belize hosted a Caribbean-wide meeting about 6 weeks ago on sustainable development. 4 major threats to sustainable development in the Caribbean were raised. Macroeconomic growth because of low productivity, poor competitiveness and productivity because of low skills, low human development compared to other regions in the world, affecting productivity, competitiveness, macroeconomic growth, and then poor climate resilience, in part because of low levels of innovation, again coming back to skills, poor educational outcomes, investment in human capital. If we don't address an issue like child marriage, which excludes girls, 50% of, potentially a threat to half of the population of children in school, but also underpowers our productive workforce entering out of childhood. We are directly, looking away from these threats to our sustainable growth and development in Belize. So we have to start to speak to the nation, to the communities, to families about the long-term impacts of, basic neglect of rights and protection for children, including child marriage, if we're able to really optimize the potential of every child.
But it's a policy decision. The policy decision in terms of what age marriage is, who can get married, whether it's same-sex or whether or not it's children, it's a policy decision. And so I think we start and end with the law. And more so, the law, you were talking about the fact that the law it speaks to a gender inequality. But that gender inequality is necessary for the policy because the way the law is written, it protects the young lady because the young lady has the potential to become pregnant, has to rear a family on her own, and the economic consequences of that. So there's an inbuilt bias, gender bias, in favor of the child, which should be there, and inbuilt in favor of the female. And Ms. Nick will tell you that the issue of a female child having sex with a gentleman nothing happens to the female. Only the male can be criminalized. And that innate bias is necessary because of the way we take it as a policy of the way we protect young women. Is there anything wrong with that aspect of it, you think?
My mind is buzzing all over that.
Yes, yes, I hope so.
But yes, because in fact child marriage does affect boys as well. The data from the mix shows that in fact while 1 in 5 girls in Belize is married before the age of 18, about 1/5 of that rate is the rate in boys. So a smaller proportion, but absolutely does affect boys as well. The law that we have on sexual exploitation that we worked on with, the UNICEF worked on with the NCFC, does address the issue of awareness among boys about sexual exploitation in boys as well. Our laws and our communication is being revised constantly to make sure that we don't leave behind the opportunity to communicate about the violation of the rights of boys as well to protection. And the law is equally obliged to protect boys from early unions. We know that our school dropout rates are higher in boys in secondary school than they are in girls because of the expectation to work. So there is a need. There is a need to recognize and to communicate with communities and families and boys about the risk and in terms, you know, the risk related to early unions as well. But I think that, you know, it is still a question of gender and expectations, social expectations around behavior and limitation.
Because as we stand, a 17-year-old boy two minors can't marry. Am I right? A 17-year-old boy cannot marry a 16-year-old.
So with parental consent?
With parental
even with
consent.
parental consent.
Oh, no.
With parental consent.
Because a 17-year-old, well,
With parental
it's
consent.
a good research to do.
But they can have
but
like...
I don't think so.
It can't.
No, I don't think so.
But again,
Legally.
the number of legal marriages are
Yeah.
not the like
Yeah.
that's not where
early
the
union
number is. The
marriage.
numbers in
The
unions.
early
And
unions.
yes,
Early
there are
union.
plenty of adolescents.
But I think that there has to be a public campaign. You know, whether it is parents, boys, schools, whoever. I think there has to be a public campaign because if we really want to change norms and values, there has to be a public campaign because I think that in terms of, for instance, parents who might agree or who agree that this can happen, as you rightfully said, it might have been something
They could be products of
with
child marriages.
socialization,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
The whole issue of socialization, and we discussed this yesterday. It happened to me. What is the big deal?
Yeah.
That's right.
You know, and I am okay, notwithstanding the fact that I might not be. So it's the whole issue of socialization. So there has to be really and truly a part of the process has to be a public campaign. It has to remain on the burner. We need to continue the discussion. We need the media. We need everybody to be a part of the solution because we are seeing every day the negative effects of the issue of early unions and child marriages because we're seeing it.
Well, for those of us who are baffled at the thought of this still taking place in our society, or perhaps choosing to be ignorant to the fact that it is still taking place, and I think, you know, while Kevin says there's no effect on girls in early marriage, my mind is just saying there's so many. And perhaps that's where we didn't take this conversation. I know that's not what you meant, but I was just saying. You were talking the legal aspect. The legal aspect.
Absolutely
But that's why I wanted to be clear that there are effects. When a child enters into a union before they are mature enough to make that decision, what is happening here? What are the long-term effects of whether it's a boy or a girl living as a married adult from the age of 15? What are we talking about?
What we're talking about is interruption of schools, first of all, right? Because a child should be in some form of learning opportunity. So interruption of school is very likely. Childbirth and the start of parenting, which confers responsibilities far beyond any child should be having to assume. With childbirth, we know from the data that children born to young girls tend to be lower birth weight. They tend to thrive less nutritionally and physically and need intensive health care and support from exactly a parent who's already excluded by virtue of their young age from other mothers who should be their peer group. So we also know that there is, because of interrupted education, there is a lowering of the potential in terms of skills development, which means that continually you start this cycle of lower productivity and opportunity for employment opportunities, for employment and gainful employment to support a family, which starts the cyclic, the cycle of poverty for the child and other threats. So there are intense long-term effects of child marriage and early union that we know affect the child, ultimately the child's child or children, and therefore the family and community and the nation, as I said, as an extension.
Early unions are just part of a gradient to me, because at 14, the parent, if they're aware of the relationship that they're having with a male, is their first gatekeeper. And then at 16, it's the state. And then thereafter, then it's the law. Why have we not been able to address any one of these? Because there is a law addressing the relationship. Because marriage is just simply a level of the relationship that they're having. It really starts off with them having a boyfriend, girlfriend. And speaking about, as you were saying, the outside of the law, the entire way that we look at ourselves as a society. Because take, for example, a parent who has a daughter who's going out with a 15-year-old, and they've been going together, a high school sweetheart, we call them. And they've been going together from 14, 15, but we all know what's going on. And then they become 18. How do you separate it just with the abstractness of a marriage and going to that, when the real issue, the base of the issue is the relationship, and whether or not we even approve of the level of the relationship? Why are we going all the way to marriage? When that's so easy to get away?
I really want to come back to one fundamental statement that you made there about it starts with a relationship, a boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, and go back to the point about evolving capacities of the child. We know that many of the sexual relationships entered into by children at 15, 16 may be age disparate, or there's an intergenerational relationship with a power dynamic that, you know, by virtue of that age difference makes it potentially exploitative. And that's what the law is supposed to protect these children from. And so we need to question, again, the issue of the legitimacy of consent in a child to enter into that union. And we need to look at the social factors around that child to make sure that we are not overlooking potential factors that may mask the fact of free will, the potential of free will.
What's the data? What's the data on the nature of the relationships in terms of the exploitative ones, and what's
There's
the data?
a CSEC study that was done.
Yes, I mean, this is data that we can share. No?
Yeah.
We could share the data with you.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
Because it's of concern.
Yeah.
So we could share
Yeah.
it.
So,
Given, we
what
could send
this-
it to Marlene and she
what
can-
this conversation has highlighted, and I think, you know, very clearly, is that because of the multiple layers involved, you know, you have societal, cultural, you have many misconceptions, and I really tried as much, because from my understanding of this issue, it's not just rural areas that it's taking. We're not talking about people in a village who don't know.
No.
It happens in well-established towns and cities, and I mean Belize, not outside of the country. So there's so many different layers that have to be addressed, and I imagine all of it, this is probably just a replica of the conversation taking place at your workshop. Where do you go from here? Where do you take all these issues and prioritize and move towards action with, and I hate to bring it up, the political will to drive it? Because you're right, a swipe of a pen removes the proviso. Which
First reading, second reading,
I
third
think
reading.
if we'd have a referendum going to that issue today on that, I'd fail to see how
100%.
we'd lose.
100%.
But how do you prioritize the agenda for action and engage the decision makers to have that political will on board?
Well, I believe that that is our next steps, no? In terms of, and I think that is why we engage them right at the very beginning.
Yeah.
In case they didn't know, you know, because sometimes you're not always aware of everything that is going on within your society, but they were engaged at the very beginning. And we're hoping that through the caucus, that we'll be able then to, as we said earlier, to brief the cabinet on the real issue that is affecting our society.
Yeah.
And that it is not a cultural problem. It is not, that it is a serious problem.
Yeah.
And it is a harmful practice. And how it is going to eventually affect our society. Because if we look at the percentage of our young people, we have a problem. Because they are the youths. And so we have to put mechanisms and tools in place to protect them, so that we can have a solid future. Because they are not only the future, they are now. You know, and so for the rest of us, it is important that we move our young people in the right direction. And I know that sometimes the question is why no? But like Susan said, Dr. Kasedde said, no is no, and tomorrow is still no, and 2 weeks from now is still no. The fact of the matter
why
is,
not no?
that is what I was going to say. But the fact of the matter is, why not now? Because we know, and now we have, because remember, sometimes we are speculating because we don't have data. You know, we don't have no evidence. And we know without evidence we can't do anything. So we now have some evidence on which to work. So now that we have some tools, we have to ensure now with evidence we can say, this is the data. This is what is happening. And so we have to continue the advocacy, the coordination, the collaboration cannot stop. We have to keep it, as I said, on the break. And so we look forward to you and everybody else to continue to with this issue. So.
Well, I appreciate, you know, you bringing this to our studio this morning so we could have a broader conversation about it. And I think, you know, it's so clear just how many other issues are tied into it, but just where the conversation needs to go. And so we appreciate you coming in. We know you have to head back to the workshop now for day 2, and best of luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to go ahead and take a break. When we come back, we'll be talking about the 4th Street Tourism Village sensitization campaign.